I inhale the scent of her pillow, pressing my nose against the fabric, letting the quiet of the bedroom wrap around me. There's only a faint trace left, like the last exhalation of a candle's smoke before the darkness is complete. For a few moments, I just stand there, leaning into the bed as if I might soak up the closeness that once existed between us. The pillow feels cold, and I almost imagine it recoiling from me. A vibration from my phone on the nightstand disturbs the silence, a tiny hum that makes my heart jolt. It reminds me that time is passing, that every second is another step away from what I thought we had. I used to think time was on our side. In the early years, I believed every shared sunrise reinforced our bond. I told myself we'd grow old together, that those gentle routines, me cooking breakfast, her stirring coffee with a lazy swirl, both of us exchanging small smiles, would stretch out into decades. But time, as I'm slowly realizing, doesn't heal a damn thing. Instead, she was on the phone, whispering in that soft tone that used to be reserved for me alone. My body tensed at the sound, but I didn't say anything. I placed my briefcase by the door, quietly, almost reverently, and stepped into the living room without making a noise. Through the crack in the door, I watched her eyes widen at something the person on the other end said, then narrow, like she was forming some covered agreement, forging some silent promise I was never meant to overhear. Then came a laugh, the kind that held secrets. My heart hammered in my chest, but I stayed put. She ended the call and left the room, oblivious to my presence. Moments later, she emerged with her purse, her car keys, and that was when she looked at me with the glance I no longer recognized. She left the house without a word of explanation. I followed her with my eyes, though physically I stayed behind. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A neighbor. A man I barely spoke to except for the occasional greeting across the fence. He told me, voice trembling, that he had seen my wife in our own backyard with another man. His words tumbled out in confusion and pity, as though he wasn't sure he wanted to be the bearer of such a burden. My entire body went cold, every muscle tensing in a numbing wave of dread. I thanked him, perhaps too calmly, and hung up. My brain felt like it had split apart, half in denial, half in meticulous observation, like a surgeon focusing on the precise shape of a mortal wound. I was too stunned to speak, but inside my chest, a slow fire began to burn. I left work immediately, ignoring calls from my colleagues who wondered where I went. If they had seen my face then, they might have left me alone out of fear. I drove, chain smoking all the way, flicking the ashes out the window, letting the nicotine do absolutely nothing to calm me. By the time I reached home, my hands shook against the steering wheel. I realized my teeth were clenched so hard that my jaw ached. Yet I didn't roar, didn't even let out a breath. I held it inside, focusing on the fact that I had to see it with my own eyes. I parked down the street. Maybe I was afraid if I parked right in front, it would somehow tip them off. Or maybe I couldn't bear the humiliation of neighbors watching me walk into my own house as if I didn't belong there. With each step toward the backyard gate, I felt my heart pounding heavier than ever. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe the neighbor was confused. Even as I prepared for the worst, part of me still tried to offer rationalizations, like a pathetic last stand of hope. I pushed the gate open quietly. It creaked, echoing through the late afternoon stillness. And then I froze. They were there. My wife, Emily, was sitting on the old wooden bench by the rose bushes, her blouse unbuttoned just enough to reveal her collarbone. Next to her, a man I'd never seen before but recognized instantly from the phone calls and the whisper of rumors in my own mind. His hands moved over her hair, down to her waist. Her eyes were half closed, lips parted. He leaned in, kissed her neck with a lingering intimacy that stabbed through my chest like a jagged blade. I don't know how long I stood there, hidden behind the hedge, watching them. But it was long enough to see how she responded to him. Her quiet moan, the arch of her back, the way her fingers curled into his shoulder. There was no confusion, no attempt to stop, no hesitation. This wasn't some accidental fling. This was a deliberate betrayal, one that had been festering for who knows how long. Heat rushed through me, but my face felt oddly numb. I expected to explode, to charge forward, to make them both pay. Instead, I listened to my breathing slow, to my heart thunder in my ears. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me shattered. Eventually, as though some invisible timer had gone off, I stepped out from behind the hedge. My footsteps crunched on the gravel. Emily flinched, eyes snapping open. She shoved him away, scrambling to button her blouse, her face pale as chalk. He stared at me, half naked, half aroused, confusion spreading across his features. I noticed every detail. The tiny bead of sweat on his temple, the flush of his chest, the tension in his jaw. Emily opened her mouth, but nothing came out. I didn't bother to look at her. I locked eyes with him, memorized every angle of his face. Then I turned and walked away. Just like that. No yelling, no punching, no cursing them both out. I left them in my own backyard, her shame visible, his confusion turning into some kind of defensive glare. I got into my car and lit another cigarette, realizing only then that I had crushed the previous one in my hand. The burn on my palm felt distant, like someone else's pain. I drove off. In the week that followed, Emily and I performed a strange dance of pretense. She tried to pretend everything was normal. "Hey honey, how was your day?" Followed by some forced conversation about groceries or dinner. I responded with the truth. Cold, bare, painfully direct. If she asked, "Will you be home early?" I would say, "I'm not sure. I might have to check if you're busy with your friend." My words were clinical, like scalpels cutting away any illusions. She'd flinch, try to smile, then slip away with an excuse about a headache or a phone call. The more she tried to keep the facade of a normal marriage, the more I saw the desperation in her eyes. I showed nothing but a steady, controlled chill. One day she mentioned her friend's upcoming wedding, an event we'd been invited to months prior. "We should go together," she said, voice trembling as if trying to gauge my reaction. In my mind, I flashed to that scene in the backyard. Her, undone. Him, with that smug half-smile. It took every bit of restraint not to slam my fist into the table. Instead, I simply said, "Of course," and gave her the kind of tight-lipped smile that never reached my eyes. Let her wonder if I was planning something. When the wedding day arrived, I drove us to the venue. Emily wore a pale lavender dress that I'd always loved, but now it seemed to cling to her like a costume. She tried to make small talk on the way, but I gave her nothing. Her gaze flicked to me every few seconds, searching, pleading, maybe waiting for me to snap, but I kept it all in. By the time we arrived, I could sense her nerves were frayed. We mingled among familiar faces. Everyone saw us as the perfect couple, or so they must have thought. I sipped my drink, scanning the room for him, and there he was, across the hall, wearing a dark suit that looked slightly too big for his frame. His eyes darted from Emily to me, a flicker of panic crossing his features when I caught his gaze. Then he turned away, pretending to talk with someone else. The ceremony was a blur of vows and photographs. I barely remember the music. All I recall is Emily shifting restlessly beside me, occasionally brushing her hair back, trying to mask her anxiety with forced smiles. Then came that moment when the bride was about to throw the bouquet. The throng of excited women gathered behind her. Emily stood off to the side, almost absent-mindedly. But the moment the bride tossed those flowers, as though by some twisted fate, they landed squarely in Emily's hands. She gave a small involuntary shriek, drawing everyone's attention. And then it happened. She turned to him, not me, with a bright, triumphant grin. She locked eyes with him for just a second, but it was enough to see the electricity passing between them. Then she laughed, and that laugh echoed inside me like a hollow bullet casing. She tried to cover it up, glancing quickly at me, but the damage was done. Everyone else seemed to think it was just a random wedding moment, But I knew, and he knew, and she knew. I let her have her little moment. I did not confront her, did not cause a scene. Instead, I clapped politely when the bride teased Emily for being the next bride. Emily forced a smile, but I could see the fear swirling under the surface of her eyes. I mouthed, "Now you're his," quietly enough that only she could hear. Her cheeks blanched. When I saw the lover slip out of the room, I felt a jolt of savage satisfaction that he was the one running for cover, not me. 3 weeks later, I signed a short-term lease for a room. His room. I'd found it through an online listing, recognized the address, and the photographs instantly. He was offering a spare room for extra income, oblivious to the name of the applicant. M. Sawyer. Maybe he didn't make the connection. Maybe he was too arrogant to suspect such a thing was possible. I came in the evening to move my small suitcase, a few personal items. The moment he opened the door, I saw him freeze for an instant. But I gave him a neutral smile, as though we were meeting for the very first time. My hair was unstyled, my face set like stone. He looked uneasy, but then forced a polite grin and stepped aside. "Let me show you your room," he said, voice strained. I nodded and followed. Everything inside me coiled like a viper. I didn't mention Emily, didn't even say her name. And he said nothing either. If he recognized me, he pretended otherwise. Maybe he hoped this was some cosmic coincidence, or maybe he convinced himself that I was a harmless lookalike. Whatever the reason, he led me to a small bedroom at the end of a hallway. A wooden dresser, a single bed, an old table. The walls smelled faintly of her perfume, a floral undertone that made my stomach twist. I set down my bag, forced a dispassionate nod. "It'll do," I said. He gave a tight smile, told me to let him know if I needed anything. Then he left, shutting the door behind him. The next few weeks became a surreal routine. Each morning, I'd wake early, brew coffee in his kitchen, using his mugs. Sometimes I'd see her lipstick on the rim, maybe from a recent visit, or maybe from the last time she spent a night here. It set my teeth on edge, but I forced myself to remain calm, even as a cold sweat broke out under my shirt. I did his dishes, read his mail, learned the rhythms of his daily life, who he owed money to, what subscriptions he used, the brand of cereals he preferred. I studied him the way a hunter tracks prey. I learned when he slept, when he left for a jog, the nights he stayed out late. From the creaks in the floorboards, I could tell which path he took to the bathroom in the dark. He would speak to me occasionally, in stilted conversation about nothing. The weather, the local sports team, the price of groceries. His eyes constantly flicked with uncertainty. He never asked personal questions, never tried to pry into my life. Perhaps he was scared of what he might find. I didn't volunteer anything. I stayed in my room at night, overhearing his phone calls to Emily. Sometimes he'd speak in hushed, urgent tones, other times in heated anger. I'd catch fragments. "Don't shut me out. I can't stand it. When will you leave him?" It ripped me apart inside, but I kept quiet. I listened as though I was dissecting each of his pleas, each of her lies. My hands shook. My mind reeled with images of the backyard. But I said nothing. Cold, methodical silence. I told myself, let them keep spinning their tangled web. Let them believe I'm clueless. I did not remain idle. Each day, while he was out, I searched the small apartment for traces of her. I found her coffee cup in the sink, her hair tie on the couch, and one day, a small bottle of her perfume perched on the windowsill. I stared at it, at that label I recognized so well, then put it back where I found it. I felt something akin to triumphant dread. The knowledge that her presence had seeped into every corner of this man's life, into my life. The next day, I found a soft pink blanket stuffed in a closet, the same one she used to drag around our living room on lazy Sundays. I took it out, pressed it to my face, inhaled. Her scent was there, that faint mix of shampoo and body lotion that once comforted me in the quiet hours of night. Then I folded it neatly, returned it to its place. In moments of reflection, I could hear her laughter in my head. The moment she caught that bouquet, the way she tossed her hair, the hush that fell across the crowd. Then I'd remember the man's face, how he looked at her, how he touched her, how none of it belonged to me anymore. My grief took the form of a silent avalanche inside my chest, unstoppable and suffocating. And still, I wore that same calm mask. If he noticed the intensity behind my eyes, he said nothing. One night, I heard him argue with her on the phone. He was pacing in the living room while I sat in the dark corridor, listening. He hissed at her, demanded she make up her mind. I caught his words. "I can't keep sneaking around with you. It's driving me insane." Then a pause, presumably her response. "Why did you come by last night if you're not ready to?" Another pause, his voice rising. "No, I won't just shut up about it." I heard him curse under his breath. Then silence. I almost expected him to smash his phone, but he didn't. Instead, he let out a shaky exhale. For a moment, I felt something like pity for him. What a joke. The pity vanished as quickly as it came. A couple of days later, I returned to my old house to gather a few belongings. Emily was there, but we barely spoke. She was dressed in a casual outfit, leggings and an oversized sweater, and I could tell she'd been crying. The living room was half empty. Some of our framed photographs were missing from the walls. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly as I collected my shirts from the closet. I didn't answer. "We should talk," she persisted. "We're married, Mike. You can't just—" "I can," I interrupted, meeting her eyes with a steadiness that made her flinch. "We talked enough. Now we do." I saw tears form at the corners of her eyes. "We do what?" "Whatever needs doing," I said, and walked out. I didn't tell her I was living in her lover's spare room. I wanted to see the shock on her face when she inevitably found out, but that moment never came in the way I expected. She rarely came around the apartment when I was there. If she did, they must have arranged their rendezvous during the day. In the evenings, I'd sense her presence in the lingering smell of her perfume, the fresh lipstick mark on his coffee mug, but she wasn't there physically. It was like chasing a ghost. Time wore on. My mind sank deeper into a disquieting numbness. My existence revolved around collecting every piece of them I could find. Analyzing, cataloging, storing it away in some mental vault. I found old photos of us at home, stuffed them in a metal can, lit them on fire, watched as the flames devoured our wedding memories, our vacations, our anniversaries. I left only the corners, charred edges that I hammered into a small jar with nails, sealed it, labeled it in my mind as evidence. Evidence of what, exactly? Betrayal? My own stupidity? Perhaps both. A month later, she posted pictures on social media. Different man. New face. Not the same lover whose apartment I inhabited. She was out somewhere, some bar, maybe a rooftop lounge. Laughing, throwing her head back, looking radiant and untroubled. My old coworker asked me if I'd seen them. He tried to couch his words in sympathy, but the embarrassment in his eyes said enough. I simply nodded. Inside, my heart twisted in on itself like a serrated blade. She'd moved on. I was stuck, feeding off her past, replaying the same haunting scenes over and over. One night, as I was returning to the apartment, I saw his car parked out front. There was no sign of her inside, so I assumed he was alone. The hallway light was off, and the place was quiet except for the low hum of the fridge. I slipped into my room, set down my keys, listened for any movement. Nothing. Then a muffled sob made its way through the walls. It struck me like a hammer. I pressed my ear against the door. He was crying, or on the verge of it. A grown man, presumably poring over his regrets. There was a strange ache in my chest. Here I was, the betrayed husband, living under the same roof as my wife's lover, and I felt empty. This was not the confrontation I'd imagined, not the dramatic showdown where I'd lay out all the evidence of his trespasses and watch him crumble. Instead, we were two pitiful men, both losing her in our own ways. Days passed, and I found myself skipping work, ignoring calls, drifting in an aimless routine of quiet rage. I started to wonder if I'd lost track of my original plan. Did I ever have one? My revenge was meant to be subtle, a slow burn, a methodical infiltration of his life. But for what purpose? To ruin him? To watch him suffer? My mind churned with the possibilities, but each day ended the same. Me, in that lonely room, the smell of her perfume clinging to the fabric of my pillow. Some nights I'd stare at the ceiling, replaying her laughter at the wedding, the flush in her cheeks when she caught the bouquet. One evening, I decided to do something. Anything. I sat in the living room while he was out. I found a stack of his bills, spread them out on the coffee table. I took them one by one, studying the details: overdue notices, credit card statements, subscription charges. A single name repeated on one of the credit card transactions, some fancy restaurant. I recognized the date, the night of the wedding. I saw the cost, realized with a bitter smirk that he had wined and dined my wife on the same day. She humiliated me in front of everyone. My jaw tightened, but I remained eerily calm. That calmness broke the day Emily finally showed up at the apartment while I was there. She must have assumed he was alone, or maybe she just didn't care anymore. The front door clicked open, and I heard her laughter echo in the corridor. I froze. She called out his name, stepping into the living room. I emerged from the hallway, and we locked eyes. The color drained from her face. She whispered, "Oh God," as though confronted by a ghost. I said nothing. She tried to form a sentence, stuttering half-words, her hands trembling on the strap of her handbag. I waited, letting the silence choke her. Finally, she managed, "What are you doing here?" The question was so absurd that I nearly laughed out loud. Instead, I answered softly, "Living." She stared at me with wide, frightened eyes, perhaps expecting me to spring forward in violence. But I remained still, my posture almost regal. She mumbled something about forgetting he had a roommate, then turned to go. I moved closer, blocking her path with a single step. I lowered my head so that our eyes were level. "I saw you," I said, voice chillingly calm. "In our backyard, half undressed with him. I watched you. And now you're here. Does it excite you? The risk?" She opened her mouth, closed it, tears lining her lashes. "Mike, I held up a hand, silencing her. "Don't bother," I said. "You decided a long time ago. I just didn't see it until it was in front of my face." She swallowed, pain etched in her features. "I never wanted to hurt you." I nodded slowly, my anger a glacier beneath the surface. "You didn't just hurt me. You destroyed whatever we had." She stepped back, tears slipping down her cheeks. I let her pass this time. She fled, leaving the door wide open behind her. He came home an hour later, found me sitting on the couch in the dark. I could see the fear in his eyes as he hesitated in the doorway. Slowly, he turned on a lamp, dropped his keys on the kitchen counter. He must have guessed she had been there. I said nothing, simply watched him. After a moment, he cleared his throat. "I think," he began, voice cracking, "maybe you should find another place to live." I stared at him, stony silence. He swallowed hard, continued, "Look, I don't know what's going on between you two, but this situation it's not right." "Not right," I repeated, standing up. I approached him, each step measured. "You're talking to me about what's right." His eyes flared with guilt and something else. "Resolve, maybe." "I'm not proud of anything that happened," he said, lifting his chin. "But I can't have this tension in my own home." A dangerous calm settled over me. "You think you have any moral high ground here? You come into my house, you take my wife, and now you act like a wounded animal because I'm staying under your roof." He shook his head, voice trembling. "I never wanted to steal her. It just happened." You think I care about your excuses?" I snapped, the first real flash of anger in my voice. Then I forced myself back into control, swallowing the rising tide of rage. My next words came out clipped, precise. "If you want me gone, say it clearly." He grimaced, eyes flicking away from mine. "I want you gone." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. "Fair enough. I'll pack." I turned away, heading toward the hallway. But then I paused. My reflection stared back at me from the dark window, and it looked like a stranger. I turned to face him again, seeing the tension in his jaw, the fear in his eyes. "Do you love her?" I asked quietly. He nodded, tears welling up. "Yes," he managed. "I do." An echo of the pain inside my chest surfaced, threatening to overwhelm me. But I remained still. "Then keep her," I whispered. "But remember, you'll never wash away the filth of what you did. Her scent, your guilt, it's all mixed together now. And one day you'll wonder if it was worth it." He stood there, silent, as I brushed past him, each footstep echoing in the hollow space of the corridor. I packed my things in minutes, leaving behind only a few worthless items: an old shirt, a pair of socks, an empty bottle of whiskey. I wanted no souvenirs from that place. The last item I touched was that pink blanket she had left in his closet. I held it for a moment, recalling the nights she used to curl up on our couch with that same blanket. The memory stung like acid. I dropped it on the floor, turned off the light, and walked away. Outside, the crisp night air hit me like a slap. I noticed the stars overhead, bright and merciless. I stood by my car, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me. My phone buzzed. A text from Emily. I hesitated before opening it. 2 words. "I'm sorry." A fresh wave of bitterness washed over me. I typed a reply, erased it. Typed again, erased again. Finally, I wrote, "No, you're not," and sent it. Then I got in my car and drove, not entirely sure where I was headed. Perhaps I was expecting some grand sense of closure, but all I felt was a dull ache. At first, I drifted aimlessly, the city lights reflecting off the windshield like shards of broken promises. Then I found myself pulling into the old parking lot of the motel where I'd first stayed as a teenager, back when I ran away from home for a week after a stupid fight with my father. The place still existed, though the neon sign buzzed with half-dead letters. I paid cash for a room and collapsed onto the lumpy bed, staring at the ceiling. Exhaustion weighed on me, but sleep refused to come. My mind reeled with images, her face twisted in pleasure with him. The way she caught the bouquet and looked straight at him. Her tears when I confronted her in that apartment. I wondered if I'd handled it all wrong, if I should have confronted them both earlier, forced the truth into the open. But some part of me knew that silent agony was my natural response, the only way I knew how to deal with betrayal this deep. The next morning, I woke up with my throat raw, my eyes dry. My phone showed missed calls from unknown numbers, some from old work contacts, others that might have been her or him. I didn't care. I showered in scalding water, scrubbing myself until my skin burned, as if I could wash away the memory of her scent. Then I stepped outside, squinting against the morning sun. It was a new day, but I felt no relief, no sense of hope or fresh beginnings. I drove to the hardware store, an odd compulsion tugging at me. I bought a small metal box and a pack of nails. When I returned to the motel, I retrieved the jar of photo corners from my trunk, the last remnants of our life together before she shredded it. I opened the jar, letting the burned scraps spill onto the bed. They were barely recognizable as parts of photographs. Some corners had bits of color or a hint of a face. Others were just charred black. I hammered nails through them, one by one, attaching each piece to the inside of the metal box until it was like a tortured mosaic of my past. Then I sealed the box shut, scrawling across the lid with a permanent marker, "Evidence." I stared at the box for a long while, heart pounding with a dull sense of finality. This was my makeshift coffin for all the illusions of love I'd once cherished. I felt a surge of something close to release, but it didn't last. Rage, sorrow, regret. They still churned, refusing to be neatly locked away. I took the box to my car, intending to bury it somewhere, maybe toss it in the river. But as I sat there, engine idling, I realized I wanted to keep it close. Maybe as a warning, maybe as a twisted trophy. So I set it in the trunk and drove off. Work demanded my attention the following week, forcing me to rejoin the real world. My boss called me into his office, asked if everything was all right at home. I said yes, as calmly as I could manage. He didn't believe me, but he let it drop. My coworkers stared, whispered. I kept my head down, focusing on the tasks in front of me, hammering away at spreadsheets and project timelines like a machine. Late at night, back at the motel, I'd lie awake, consumed by swirling thoughts. I found myself replaying the argument with Emily, the confrontation with him. In those fantasies, I always ended differently. Maybe I threw a punch, maybe I screamed my pain at the top of my lungs. But each time, I ended up back in reality, a silent bystander to my own tragedy. I started frequenting a rundown bar a few blocks from the motel. It was the kind of place where the stale smell of beer clung to every surface, and the patrons kept to themselves. I'd nurse a double whiskey, chain smoke, and watch the static on the TV. Sometimes I'd make small talk with the bartender, who looked at me with a practiced sympathy. One night, he asked if I needed a cab home. I told him I was fine, walked the few blocks back to the motel. On the sidewalk, I passed a woman who could have been Emily's age, maybe older, looking exhausted. She gave me a cursory glance, and I looked away. I felt a pang of sadness, imagining the separate worlds we all inhabited, each carrying unseen wounds. The days stretched into weeks. Emily texted or called occasionally, leaving voicemails that oscillated between guilt and anger. "Where are you living?" she asked in one. "We have to talk about the house," she said in another. I ignored them all. Eventually, I decided I needed to see the place one last time. The house we shared, if only to collect the rest of my belongings. When I arrived, she was out. The emptiness of the place echoed with memories. I walked from room to room, picking up items that still mattered. An old toolbox, a framed diploma, a stack of books. I paused in the bedroom, noticing the bed was stripped bare, the mattress exposed. It occurred to me that she might have taken everything that made the house feel like a home. Fine. Let her keep it. As I was leaving, I spotted a letter on the kitchen counter, addressed to me. The handwriting was hers. I hesitated, then ripped it open. It was a short note, scrawled in shaky pen strokes. "I know I hurt you. I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to be okay." I crushed the note in my fist. That was all she had to offer. No explanation, no heartfelt confession, just a perfunctory statement of regret. Rage surged in my chest. Without thinking, I lit the corner of the note on fire using a lighter from my pocket, watched as the flame ate the paper. When it got too hot, I dropped it on the countertop, let it turn to ash. A thin curl of smoke rose toward the ceiling. I felt a savage sense of satisfaction. Then I turned on my heel and walked out, letting the place sink back into quiet gloom. A day later, I got a call from a mutual friend. The friend had seen Emily with him, her lover, Jack, arguing loudly in a parking lot. They said it looked ugly, something about lies, broken promises. Part of me felt a grim vindication. So their perfect union was already cracking. Another part of me felt that same old pity for him. Maybe I shouldn't. But there it was. We were both used by her illusions, or maybe we used her illusions ourselves. The lines were too blurred to see clearly anymore. It was that night, in a haze of whiskey and exhaustion, that I had a dream. Emily standing in a wedding dress, bouquet in hand, turning to me with a smile. But her eyes were hollow, and in the background, he stood there, half naked, beckoning her away. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Then she laughed, that same laugh from the wedding we attended together. And the scene dissolved into darkness. I woke up sweating, feeling like I'd swallowed shards of glass. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone, scrolled through her social media. She had posted another picture, smiling brightly, hugging someone new. I tossed the phone aside with a curse, nearly smashing it in my frustration. My fury turned inward. I was living in the past, refusing to move forward. She was out there, already making new memories. Jack was probably drowning in regret or some half-baked fantasy that she'd return to him. And me? I was no closer to healing than the day I found them in the backyard. I don't know what final impetus pushed me to make the next move. Maybe it was the realization that I had to face her properly one last time. Maybe I just needed to exorcise the ghosts that haunted me. But I contacted her, sent a single text telling her to meet me at a lakeside park near the old pier. It was where we used to go when we were younger, back when our love was new and untainted. She agreed, said she'd be there at sunset. When I arrived, the sky was ablaze with oranges and reds, a color scheme so beautiful it felt almost mocking. She stood by the pier railing, wearing a light jacket and jeans, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. I walked up slowly, joined her without speaking. For a few minutes, we stared at the water in silence. Eventually, she spoke. "I miss the way things used to be," she said, tears in her voice. "I know I messed up, Mike." I let her words hang in the air, watching a seagull wheel overhead. "Yes," I replied, my voice flat. "You did." She turned to face me, and I saw raw regret in her eyes. "I'm not with him anymore," she said quietly. It wasn't what I thought. We fought all the time. He wanted me to leave you completely, but I couldn't. I felt guilty. And maybe I still care about you, in some way. I don't expect you to understand." I kept my gaze fixed on the water. "Care about me, do you?" I murmured. Strange way of showing it. Her breath caught, and I sensed her tear up. "You have every right to hate me," she whispered. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry." The wind picked up, rustling the trees behind us. I inhaled sharply, letting the chilly air fill my lungs. "I don't think I hate you, Emily," I said. "I wish I did. It would be simpler." She inched closer, perhaps seeking some thread of hope. "Mike, if you want to try again." I gave a short, hollow laugh. "No, that's not why I'm here." Slowly, I pulled out a small envelope from my jacket. Inside was a single sheet of legal paperwork, a draft of our divorce agreement. I handed it to her. "I just need you to sign." She took it, hands trembling. "So that's it?" she asked, voice breaking. I looked at her, at the tear glistening on her cheek. My own eyes stung, but I kept my composure. "That's it," I confirmed. "We both know there's no going back." She nodded numbly, turning away to wipe her tears. We stood there in silence for a few moments, the waves lapping against the pier. Finally, she faced me again. "I'll sign," she said. "I'll send it to your lawyer." She hesitated, searching my face. "What will you do now?" I shrugged, feeling the emptiness like an echo in my chest. "Keep living," I said, echoing the same word I told her in the apartment. "Somewhere. Somehow." She reached out as if to touch my hand, then withdrew. A bitter part of me felt relief that she didn't dare close that gap. I nodded once, turning on my heel, walking away down the pier. I didn't look back. As I headed for my car, I felt tears burning in my eyes. I let them fall, silent, unstoppable. A wave of grief crashed over me, the final acceptance that everything we had was gone. The pain was cold, like a frozen dagger lodged in my heart, but that cold was an emotion in its own right. It reminded me that I could still feel something. I got in the driver's seat, sat for a long moment, eyes closed. In my mind, I saw that night in the backyard again. But this time, instead of watching them from the hedge, I saw myself turning away sooner, never letting the image burn itself into my memory. I exhaled, started the engine. I had done what needed to be done. There was no triumphant sense of revenge, no glorious victory, but there was a strange relief that came from confronting the wreckage head-on. I told myself that maybe this was the start of something new, a life unshackled from her betrayal. As I drove, I passed the street leading to the apartment where I'd lived with the lover. A fleeting urge hit me to knock on his door, to see if he was there, to stare into his eyes and remind him that he had no real claim on her or on my memories. But the urge subsided. The anger had dulled into something more resigned. I kept driving. Darkness fell, and I found myself back at the motel. Tomorrow, I'd look for a more permanent place, something that didn't reek of musty carpeting and despair. I'd figure out a new routine, a new normal. But tonight, I would allow myself to sit with the finality, to taste the bitterness of a lost marriage and a love gone rancid. I parked, killed the engine, and stepped out into the night air. A single street lamp flickered overhead, casting a weak circle of light. I opened my trunk, stared at the metal box labeled evidence. For a long minute, I didn't move. Then, carefully, I lifted it out, carried it to the motel room, and set it on the small table by the window. Perhaps one day I'd get rid of it. Perhaps I'd bury it somewhere, leave it behind. But not now. For now, it was a reminder of what I lost and what I refused to become. A prisoner of my own hatred. I flicked on the lamp and sank into the chair, listening to my own ragged breathing. I sat there for hours, letting the memories wash over me, one final time. The phone calls, the backyard, the wedding bouquet, the forced smiles, the pink blanket in his closet. I tried to let each image flow through me like water, washing away a piece of the pain. Eventually, exhaustion took over, and I fell asleep in that chair, haunted by the hum of the neon sign outside my window. Morning came with a quiet hush. I stretched, wincing at the stiffness in my neck. The first thing I saw was the metal box, glinting in the early light. I reached out, ran my fingers over the cold surface. It felt like a tangible weight of my past. I stood up, opened the window to let in fresh air. A gentle breeze ruffled the papers on the table. Outside, life continued. Cars passed on the main road. People walked by. The world spun on without pause. In that moment, I decided I would keep living, truly living, not just existing in the wreckage of my marriage. I would find a place of my own, maybe continue my career or start something new. I might still feel the echo of her betrayal in quiet moments, might still taste the bitterness of regret. But I was done being the silent bystander to my own life, done living in the shadows of their twisted affair. If coldness was also an emotion, then maybe I would wear it for a time, use it as a shield until my wounds healed. I owed myself at least that much, so I showered, packed my meager belongings, and walked out of the motel room, leaving the key at the front desk. As I reached my car, I glanced at the trunk where the box now sat once more. Perhaps someday I'd open it again, rummage through the nails and charred edges of old photos, maybe even show it to someone I trusted. If I ever trusted anyone that deeply again. Or maybe I'd throw it into a fire, scattering the final ashes of that heartbreak for good. I didn't know yet. I started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot, and merged onto the highway. The morning sun lit the road ahead, and I realized I had no precise destination, just a sense that I was heading forward. For the first time in a long while, forward felt like the right direction. And so I drove, letting the hum of the tires and the wind through the windows soothe me. I felt the cold hollow inside my chest, but it no longer dictated my every move. I'd survived the worst of it. In my rearview mirror, the city skyline faded. I kept my eyes on the horizon, resolute, determined. Yes, I would carry these scars, but I would carry on. And that, I decided, was enough.